Miller, I'm the director here at the Gordon Snellgrove. I'm really happy to have this show. We had another show that Gale came by with. That was 2 years ago, I think now. Yeah, with Sandra Lettingham and who else? Was there somebody else in that show?
Just the two of us.
Yeah, right. So, and I got a good fridge out of the deal because my fridge was broken at the time, as I recall, and I traded around, and Gale gave me a new fridge. And it's almost impossible to get fridges here on campus because they, how do you get a budget for a refrigerator? It has nothing to do with research or whatever. But I'm very happy to have this show. I think it's looking really good. We've got 4 artists here. Paper, Clay and Canvas. It's Gale Hagblom, Puck Janes, Cathryn Miller, Martin Tagseth. And you know about the reception that's happening tomorrow night. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss that because we've got Hot Club Saskatoon with Shelley Ewing. Is Skip Cut's going to be here as well? Yeah, because they're a couple and they work.
He is. It's a Hot Club.
Okay, so I think that's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be great. And I'm just going to make these introductions really, really brief, and the artists will mostly introduce themselves. But so first we'll start out here because we've only got pictures working for Cathryn Miller's piece. But Cathryn, I was really happy to be introduced to your work a couple of weeks ago from your website.
Yes.
I fell in love with this piece here. You know,
My Winter.
and I won't ask you how long it took to make. Okay, because I know that's like the most typical kind of question an artist can get. Okay, because artwork typically gets valued by how much time you actually took to build the piece, but it doesn't come down to that actually. But Cathryn works with her husband David here on Biopia Press. And you publish artist books, your own stuff, and do you do other artist books as well?
We've done photographic books. David's a photographer. We've done travel journals. I've worked with other artists like Anita Rockamora and Mary Romanek, and done collaborative, or I have produced artist books from their work.
So if I come to you with an idea, can you make it happen? Do you do that sort of thing?
If I like the idea
Only
and
if
I
you
want
like
to
the
play.
idea.
Well, I don't
If I
have-
come to you with a bad idea.
Then I'll just send you away.
Okay. So Cathryn did fine arts at U of T, commercial art in Ottawa, has honors in English. You worked as a geological draftsman, a microfossil picker, and I'm sure that will help us a lot in trying to figure out your work here, right? So maybe you'll talk about that, maybe you won't. Martin Tagseth is going to talk about his ceramic pieces out here. And Martin and I crossed paths at NASCAD in probably 1989 or 90, thereabouts. And you were working with Walter Ostrom there, and do you remember?
Yeah, in ceramics.
Yeah,
mostly,
okay, it was a long time.
Yeah, mostly I was doing.
Right.
Strange
But
things.
NASCAD was one of these, interesting places. And Gail, you also did
I'm a
some time at
NASCAD grad,
NASCAD,
yeah.
right? Because it was such a, it was this kind of conceptualist hotbed, but it was also very, very strong in crafts and painting. And like the conceptualists sort of were on one side, and this hot crafts and painting thing was on another side. And in fact, the two communities very often didn't talk. And it was amazing actually to me that, because I was on, I won't tell you what side I was on, but I had very little contact with people who were on the other side. Anyway, it was a very interesting place, and I think it still is an interesting place. And I know all those conceptualist professors there were great folk art collectors because there's such a rich tradition in Nova Scotia of folk art, right? Puck Janes came in from Ottawa. Thank you so much for doing that. That's so great. But in fact, you lived here, for most of your adult life. Yeah?
Absolutely.
Are you from here?
I consider myself from here just because I had spent so long, but I'm sort of Western Canada.
Western Canada, right. And you recently moved to Ottawa, what, 2 years ago?
3, yeah.
3 years ago now? And now you're in Eastern.
Yeah,
Is
well,
that right?
yeah, I observe the East.
So Puck is involved with the Ottawa Gladstone Clayworks Collective Cooperative. And according to your CV here, you've worked in clay on and off for 20 years. You have your BA in social sciences, but you did lots of workshops with Martin is one of the people that you list here, and Sandra Lettingham, and she's shown with the Sasterra group. She's in the collection of the Saskatchewan Arts Board, and has shown her work in the gift shops of Winnipeg Art Gallery, Mendel, the Mackenzie, and various others. And Gale Hagblom, who is really, you know, the glue for this show, again, did her BFA through NASCAD, I guess, but you actually got your papers through U of S, right?
No, I studied here, and then I got my papers.
And then you went to
Finished
NASCAD.
it all off at NASCAD.
Oh, so we don't have you in our collection, right? Because you didn't have your graduating show
That's
at
right.
U of S, right?
I tried to donate a piece, but
And
were
what,
just
they wouldn't take it?
They were just too, yeah. they
Yeah,
couldn't
well, there's a
coordinate.
more receptive director now, you see,
Yeah.
so.
Try again.
Gale also, after MFA, decided that she wanted to make some money. And so she, I'm guessing,
Still
so,
hoping. No.
so she did her MA in Geography and Planning. She's a planning consultant now with the Waterwolf District Planning Commission. And I'm just going to read this quote that I found from you, and maybe we can ask you about that later, and maybe it's going to, you know, reverberate later as you're talking about your work. She writes, "The vast lateral landscape with the intermittent infusion of color is a large part of my inspiration. I interpret, abstract, sublimate to unveil and explore the familiar." It's kind of nice. Anyway, Cathryn, please take it away.
Okay. Well, as you have all already heard, my name is Cathryn Miller, and I am one half of Biopia Press. And this is the rest of Biopia Press. My husband David, who is tech support, bear support, and general health and encourager. I'm not going to show you any slides that have 7 colors and 5 typefaces, and I'm not going to read any text off the screen, so the kittens may live. I started making artist books in 2004, but in 2006 I was introduced to what people were calling altered books. And they were frequently sort of a misunderstanding of the work of Tom Phillips, who's an English artist who has altered text. And he has actually constructed a new book and storyline out of an old book. And he's altered the pages. But these were people who were just sort of painting over pages, gluing things in, totally irrelevant to the content of the book they were using, often buying new books to work on. And so I was appalled by the idea of buying a brand new book and basically destroying it. And I was sitting at home and I have all these old copies from my childhood of the Time Life Nature Library. And I was looking at the copy of The Universe and I thought, I know what I'm going to do. So I thought, I'll show you an altered book. And I took the entire text block and folded it into Frozen Stars. So that was the beginning of my altered book period. I worked through a number of copies of the Nature Library, turning each one into something that was specifically appropriate to the content. Because I thought there should be some relationship between the previous form and the new form. I then started working with dictionary pages. This one is made from, excuse me, I have to stand over here to read. It's a copy of the section of foreign words and phrases pages from the New Webster Dictionary. And it's called double entendre because that's one of the phrases in those pages, and the book transforms. Oops. The book transforms so that you can turn the whole thing inside out. So it's two things. It's a closed box or it's an open box. This is C pages from a dictionary, and every element in the hat starts with the letter C. So there's carnations and coleopsis. I then thought, well, why not do a whole dictionary? So this is the Oxford International Dictionary of the English Language. It was 2,536 pages. The pages were 11 inches by 9 inches, old measure. And so I took that and I made this. So there's the work in progress. There's a section of rope shown stuck in one end of the tube. The tube is hollow, just to show, because there is actually an actual rope inside the piece. So let's see, I think I have actually, yeah, when I was sewing the beads, it took an entire year of evenings, 3 to 4 hours an evening to make the beads. It took 3 months of evenings to sew them together. I could sew them approximately 44 beads for 10 centimeters, and I could do about 10 centimeters in an hour. So there it is. It's approximately 38,000 beads, and it's 22 meters or 72 feet long when fully extended. I don't usually, I have been working with dictionaries, but I also do writing and reviewing for publications, and I was sent a review copy of this book called Decomp. Poets Stephen Collis and Jordan Scott in 2011 took copies of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species and took them out into the BC wilderness in various places and then left them for a year to see what would happen, and then wrote poetry in response. And it was then published in a book with a critical introduction, and I got a copy to review late in 2013, and I hated it. That was, as far as I could tell, it was the worst of self-indulgent, artsy-fartsy, bad behavior. So, however, when I wrote the review, I didn't say all that because the editor of the magazine was terrified if I said anything negative. So I talked about the book itself, and the physical structure was wonderful. Coach House Press did a brilliant job of turning this random ephemera, including photographs and fragments of text, into something that was a functioning object. Nice type design, nice layout, really good paper. Anyway, in early January 2014, I nailed it to a tree. And it took 20 months, but what I hoped for would happen did. These are bald-faced hornets, and they make the giant paper nests that you occasionally find in trees, or in our case, sometimes in the garage. And they started using it as part of their building material. And this is what they made. That's probably about that tall. So it's a nice nest. Unfortunately, as you can see from this photograph, the back has been ripped out and the contents, the core removed. And we suspect this guy. This is a photo from the internet. I do not have an actual photograph of the predator. But we had a wasp nest, a hornet's nest in the garage, and it disappeared one night, and there were raccoon footprints. So I'm assuming that what they do is they haul things out and they eat the eggs and grubs from the core, because that would be really high protein.
But he was destroying the work and may have read your review before he did that.
I was wondering if it was an editorial comment on my process. Anyway, this is the heart, the original comb from the center of the nest, which was left on the ground because it would have already been empty, with one pathetic bald-faced hornet checking it out. So I collected that and went to the paper. There's the comb mounted in one half of Recomp, which is the piece. There's some of the nest paper along the edge of the frames. There's a close-up of the hornet chewed paper, and I used some for a collage on the outer covers. And I made a booklet out of an accordion book out of the rest of some of the rest of the pages. The R's in both cases are cut out of the nest paper. In my artist, so that's the last of the altered books I'll show you, and you can get a closer look over there. When I'm doing artist books, I sometimes do books that actually look like books, but I'm more interested in transmitting information in alternate forms so that the piece becomes a whole experience. It's not just like flipping through the pages of a book. The structure actually relates to the content. So I've designed a number of alternate forms for books over the years. Because they make the piece more interactive, so the reader has to actively participate beyond just turning pages. The structure, again, is chosen to relate, as I did with the altered books, chosen to relate to the content. So this one, which is about home, opens and closes like a Venetian blind, because when I was a child in Montreal, all our neighbors had both Venetian blinds and cross-stitch samplers that said things like "Home Sweet Home" or "Home is Where the Heart Is." So as you can see, I use alternative structures. So this piece, the bottles, it's an autobiography. And it started with a long time ago, in 1973, I think, it had it been down. 1972, Jim Croce recorded a song called "Time in a Bottle." And I always thought the line, "If I could save time in a bottle," was one of those just really evocative phrases. So that went into the back file. And 3 years ago when I was in Toronto visiting my sister, I found those labels and I thought, oh, those are so nice. They're letterpress printed and they're on Japanese paper. I'll just buy some of those. And then I found little glass bottles in the dollar store. So things started to come together. Here are handwritten labels being glued on one by one on 100 bottles. There are cases for the bottles. And there's the boxes not yet folded for the piece. There will be a small book that has the entire list of dates enclosed in it. And that's the beginning of the biography. I did have to leave some really good stuff out, like the time my friend and I made gunpowder with her chemistry set and blew a crater in her parents' basement floor. But if you're limited to 100 events from your childhood, if you really start thinking about it, you do have to edit because everything in childhood is new and fresh, so they're all new memories. So if you do have time, I would appreciate if you could spend a little time reading the biography. And for anybody who has a pen and paper, that's my website. You can see more of my work on there. And I write a weekly blog, so I talk about the process, about what I'm working on, and how things are made.
How do you want to do this? Mark, do you want to, I think we're going to sort of do a walkthrough here at this point. And I'm really sorry that technical difficulties, I could not get your pictures to work here.
I couldn't either.
But we actually have real work in the gallery, so why don't we deal with the real stuff?
Well, I don't know if people need to walk through it, do they? Do you want to?
Or do you want to just talk about it
We
first?
can just talk about
I can just talk really generally about what I do, I guess. Unless people want to walk through and ask any questions about it. It seems pretty straightforward to me, but maybe not to everyone else. So, yeah, my name's Martin. I grew up in Humboldt, Saskatchewan, and like Marcus said, I received a Bachelor's of Fine Arts from NASCAT, but I was one of them conceptual guys. No one considered anyone that worked with clay to be conceptual because of the material.
Right.
After that, I went to Ohio State University to pursue my master's degree and entered Ohio State doing large-scale installation and performance art and left making pottery at the urging of my committee, who were some of the highest regarded conceptual artists in the U.S. educational
They
system.
told you to go away and be a potter.
They sent me actually to Norway to learn what a finely crafted object was all about. My installations and performances were about domestic space, domestic life, a lot of rural sort of themes. And they thought, I can't remember their exact words, but basically they said, everything you are working on is about a domestic space and enjoying a life that doesn't necessarily lead to objects that make you just think about something. They make you feel something. So they demanded that I learn how to make pottery and make pottery that people could handle and feel, so I could understand the concept of utility and useful things. So, yeah, and then I started a doctorate degree, but I didn't finish it because we had a child. So we moved back to Canada, and within a year, I was teaching at the University of Alaska and building a ceramic program there. I taught there for just about 5 years, and then came back and taught it a whole bunch of places, not finding very much of it fulfilling. And the more I taught at the university, I found the more I had to substantiate and defend my decisions in the academic world to make pottery. It was not accepted as art in any of the institutions where I taught. So I quit teaching and decided I was going to make whatever I wanted to make, whenever I wanted to make it. And in regards to the pottery, I guess the longer I make it, the farther I go back in history to research how things began. And I'm getting into the 14th century now and understanding the kiln design and the type of materials that were used. The majority of my clay is hand-dug clay from Saskatchewan. I do order in some materials from other places. I'm working on a kiln design right now for a potter some of you may know, Mel Bolin in Carmel, which is based on a 14th century, one of the very first kilns ever produced that got to stoneware temperatures. The ability to melt ash is a stoneware temperature. So that's where I'm beginning on the design for that kiln. And it's a large majority of my studio work is actually kiln design. I think I've built about 60 different kilns across North America now. So that was going to be what was mostly in my slide presentation. Building kilns, yeah. So, and that's about it. I guess the work you see here is coming out predominantly out of Onagama kiln. An Onagama kiln is a one single tunnel chamber. So Ana means one, Gama means tunnel. And I built that in Lake Lenore, and that's my primary firing tool. So
It's wood-fired.
all wood-fired, yes. Everything in this exhibition is wood-fired with the combination of salt and or soda firing and subsequent firings after the wood. So that's that.
In the same kiln?
Different kilns.
Different kiln?
Yeah, and it was funny because I went to the Craft Council Gala thing on Saturday, and there was a lot of Mel Bolin won a prize, and it was in his statement he had talked about never give up on a good pot. And people were asking and talking that they didn't think it was possible to fire a finished peat like at that temperature more than once. And I was thinking about it, and I went home and I keep a diary, especially in regards to the kiln, because it's the only way you can figure out what's really happening. And discovered that I had fired one piece over 18 times. Until it came right.
Until it was right.
Until it was right,
Is
yeah.
it here?
No, I remembered the piece, and I remembered I was short one pot, like I am in this one, short one pot, for an exhibition in, I think it was West Virginia. And not thinking, I grabbed that pot and stuck it in with all the rest. And the other day I was just beside myself thinking, that was in every single wood kiln that I fired in Canada up until that point in time. So, yeah. Some of these have been fired a few times, some of them have been sandblasted. Yeah, and the white spots in terms of surface are a natural material called feldspar, which is part of the clay. It's a lithium-based feldspar. And I don't think there's too much else to say.
You said hand-dug local clay, hand-dug by you?
Yes.
And which locales?
I was going in the general areas of Claybank, Saskatchewan, Willow Bunch, and then there was a farmer from the Lake Lenore area that had land there, out in, I can't remember exactly where that was. It was kind of in the middle of nowhere, about an hour from Willow Bunch. And I was getting a lot of clay from there. It was really, really high grade on the edge of a vein, which actually is now being mined by the by NASA. They're removing clay from that site to use for the tiles on missile launch sites. Originally, they got the clay for the space shuttle, for the tiles on the space shuttle, and the tiles on the pad where they launched it. So, yeah.
But you got it first.
Well, I didn't get to that, but it's in the same vein. And as the vein moves through, it changes over varying amounts of alumina and silica and iron and other things. And I was specifically looking for a clay there, which we call a ball clay. And I happened to find a ball clay that had quite a bit of alumina and silica in it, in the form of silica sand. So on some of these pots, you'll see small white little dots, smaller than the big ones, and that's that natural silica sand in the ball clay. It's getting harder for me to get out there and dig the clay because people are finding out what it is and its value. So less and less I'm actually using it. The veins that I'm getting access to now are often contaminated with things like shale and coal and other materials that make it kind of, they fume out in the kilns and it's not a good atmosphere to be breathing. So it's taking longer and longer to refine and get those things out of the clay. So I'm down to maybe I have 2 clay bodies that I mix up, and the one is probably 40% natural clay, and that's the highest percentage of the natural clay I use still.
Has the province been prospected for clay? I mean, in the south, I know people happened upon it.
Yeah, I have my hands on a book from 1954 on the geological clay deposits of the province, and that's how I located. And they did extensive testing on all of the clays back then, and for whatever reason it was decided it wasn't economical, except to brick companies that made brick. For instance, RHI mines clay out there, Plainsman gets made their clay from there, IXL Bricks out of Medicine Hat used to have sites, but I don't think too many of them do anymore.
East End.
East End is another site, yeah. Yeah, there's lots there. Along the Big Muddy, all along there, there's really great clays.
Very interesting.
What's your average firing temperature in a wood kiln? I mean, not temperature, well, that too, but length of time.
Length of time? So in the Onagama, the large kiln, we fire it for 7 days. I have a smaller wood kiln that we fire for about 60 hours. And then I go to another kiln in the US and fire with a friend, and that's a 5 to 6 day firing. But in my main big kiln in Lake Lenore, we had 6 or 7 days.
So when Mark tells you that you can't come to something because he's firing, he really means it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Martin, what about salt firing? Because at NASCA they had this extraordinary salt fire kiln.
Yeah.
They dismantled it in, I think,
Right.
2000.
They took it down because there was a lot of
8,
people
yeah.
thinking, well, and there's some merit to it, but over the years I've discovered doing some research at Ohio State in their chemistry lab. Orton, some of us ceramists understand that. Orton Collins, right? Well, their lab is at Ohio State University. We did research, a person named Will Shinkarak, and the technician at Ohio State was Gale Stengel. And together with some of the technicians there, we did a comparison on soda vapor firing and salt vapor firing. And we found that salt vapor firing was actually not nearly as dangerous to our health and the fumes as people had assumed. Specifically because salt goes back to salt. So by the time it comes out of the chimney, it's just salt. And it's a natural material. Now, if you stick your nose in front of the 1300 Celsius temperature area, it's not a good thing to breathe. But you can do things in your studio to remove those fumes and stuff from the general area of the kiln. That's why I chose to go back to salt firing, because especially in this climate, it seemed like maybe the soda vapor firing was a little bit more abrasive to my lungs and such. And also seeing what it did to the inside of the kiln, to these really, really durable materials, in comparison to salt, the soda seemed a lot worse. It's very corrosive, yes, and it doesn't revert back to its natural material like salt does.
shapes and the finishes reminds me of very historical, very aged, and I assume that's obviously consciously done. I'm just wondering what period are you trying to achieve, or
Okay.
what's your love of history?
I look a lot at Japanese Momoyama period works. That's like 17th century Japan. 17th and 18th century Korean forms I look at. And I look at very specific forms, and just because of the inherent qualities, especially of the line. So the thing I'm looking at in some forms is in some of the poetry that was written in Korea and Japan and such about those lines and the forms, about the fluidity of a curve, and how the shape of the pot, especially one of these, is viewed as just a line between in and out. And if that line has a very consistent and fluid curve, then it will set up a certain ambiance and or feeling in the room and within the viewer who's viewing it. So this one in particular it's a Chinese technique, but it's been named by Japan as hakimi, but it's on a Korean form. And I use the Japanese glaze over top of it. And the glaze is called hagi, and it comes from that Momoyama period in Japan. The other form it's an adaptation of some of the agrarian architecture in the area, but it's made and fired in a style of a Japanese type of work called bizen. Mixed a little bit with what they call shigaraki type wear. So I'm trying to play with all of these things throughout history and maybe, I don't know about displace them, but put them together in ways that will maybe just change the way you look at that tradition. So for instance, after a brief period of working in Korea with some Japanese and Korean masters and listening to them talk about things, firing a vase like that on its side in that culture is it's just the worst thing you could ever do. It's like unbelievable how angry they would get with me for doing that if I was working within that area. So I do a lot of that now because I'm allowed here.
What do you mean firing on its side?
It's laid on its side on a little stand to try and just change the way you see that fluid curve. I can show you which one.
Yeah.
This piece. So it changes the way the ash settles, and it really influences the way you see that curve. In some ways, almost camouflages the curve.
What about the carved piece?
The carved piece is based on Tang Dynasty pilgrim flasks, and they're earthenware. I do big ones, and I use patterns off of saddles and leather purses and other Western Canadian patterns.
But not in earthenware. You don't work in earthenware.
I don't work in earthenware, no, not for the pots. I do use earthenware for other things. So I've taken a predominantly lead glazed earthenware tradition and transposed it into the wood firing tradition of Japan.
Is that kind of education in your future? Or have you divorced yourself from academics entirely?
I am actually still adjunct professor at University of Regina, but I'm not an active participant. I help them out with other things. I've built them wood kiln, and I consult with them on kiln design and rebuilding things. And I'm actually on the faculty of graduate studies and independent research. So I have met with a few graduate students and consulted on some of their ideas in their work. But as far as being in the classroom, I'm not really very comfortable with it anymore. So I don't foresee it ever again.
Interesting. Eventually they'll catch up with you.
Pardon me?
Eventually, I think the academics will catch up with you.
I don't think so.
You're way ahead.
No,
Maybe they'll eventually figure out if you're right.
maybe not. I don't know who's right or not. Like, you know, I look at the other work in here and I see so many different ways of thinking of a concept or an idea, or how different things can be just as right as anything else. And classifying, even for me to classify these as pots, which I do all the time, to me, it feels rather strange to me to call them pots.
Well, they're also sculpture.
They are, yeah, and they're line exercises, and so, yeah. I'm not trying to make any statements at all. I'm just really, all I'm doing is trying to make these domestic spaces that, you know, people seem to be in more and more, be very, you know, to make their spaces really warm, easy to be in. Yeah, there's not much challenging here. So.
Yeah, really.
Martin, thank you very much.
Hi, give us a...
Okay, well,
Say something.
it's just, it's great to follow Martin. And I have to say that I had just found out about the week before I came here that I have the opportunity to go to Nova Scotia and take a 2-week pottery class with Walter Oster. So there's going to be like 3 of us here that have experienced that. And that just happened because I got off the waiting list, and so I'm really looking forward to that. So I want to start out about some big changes that I've had in my life, which kind of brought this work in that I moved to Ottawa 3 years ago. But the weird thing about that was I moved and lived with my daughter and her husband and my 2 grandchildren. So we have an extremely busy house, from having come from a house where it's just me and my husband, and he identified that I was unhappy not being able to see my grandchildren, and now I probably have a little bit of me that says, well, I actually see them a little bit too much, because when we moved there, Ryan was 4 and now he's 7, and we have a toddler in the house. So that, I'm always thinking about that somehow. I think it's just when we have little kids around. And I also moved into a studio where I share, it's a co-op with 25 members. I haven't really even met all the members yet. I'm on the day crew. And I went from having a garage where I worked by myself and just not a hoarder or anything, but you know how ceramics people are, to I have a shelf. And I had a little picture I was going to show you. My shelf is like literally this wide and this high, and I have to keep all my stuff on that. So again, it changes the way you think. And then Gale asked me to participate in this show last year, and so I thought, well, what am I going to do? I don't want to bring back, same old, and I have to transport it and stuff like that. And in Ottawa, I had completely changed all the processes and work that I was doing, because here I was doing what we would call low fire work, and in Ottawa, I kind of had to move into more high fire, booking kilns and different clay, like all the clay out east is not the clay that we use out west. And I got on the glaze committee. I'm the chair of their glaze committee, so of course wanted to do a lot of work on that. And so that is a really good thing, when you switch it up. And I tend to be that kind of a potter anyway, wanting to sort of go where an interest might take me. So those are some of the things that led to doing these pieces. And I developed sort of the ideas for this show, what I wanted to do by sitting on a beach in February. And I just took my headphones and I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I read the one book was The History of 7 Killings by, I referred to it on the ship stem. That was one of the first plates that I did. So I looked at books and podcasts and ideas, and what I was interested in doing was, the goals were I wanted to have, you know, my intent was to comment and to sort of provoke and to confront sort of what lots of people, I think, were thinking about this year, and that is some of the big changes that are happening specifically with our neighbors with the U.S. And I just wanted to look at and observe my personal experiences and connections with what was happening. So in the one sense, you know, it's a very personal comment. I'm thinking of the plate I did of my daughter when she got her mini sticks taken away trying to fly on an airplane here in Canada. And she said, well, it's a small price to pay for freedom. And so I thought, people see that plate and they all go, yes, and they all have stories about the same thing that's happening to them when they get on a plane here. And then reflections on our current social concerns, you know, global warming and, you know, the women's march and supporting, you know, social change in our culture. And I really want to connect with the viewer so that they could see, you know, we all had Stephen Harper as our Prime Minister, and we all have our thoughts about that. And this was such a funny little moment for me when you go into a women's clothing store, and she had these fly swatters of Stephen Harper on the desk. And I said, well, what are these? And she said, well, they're our bestseller. And it was right before the election, and they set off fireworks in the Capitol, all the civil servants who were so happy to get Stephen Harper gone. And it's very different for me coming from the West to actually experience a Liberal government win, because the Liberals just don't win out here. They don't even really have a president out here. Anyway, that kind of little observation from a Saskatchewan person, and I just thought that was so funny in the dress store. And then I wanted to show, you know, detail, you know, a world in flux, its motion, in conflict, and I also have this kind of undiagnosed attention deficit kind of personality. So for me, it was really important to have a continuity, like with the plates, and then the white crackle slip, kind of this colonial facade on this, you know, earthy material, so that I could kind of put a whole bunch of disparate kind of ideas and comments and immediate reactions onto a plate, because I tried to stop fighting the way my brain works and just kind of go for it. And actually that part of the show felt really good to me, just to be able to have the freedom to kind of, you know, put completely different things on the one plate, and then just sort of maybe explain a little bit about why that might have been the case. And I wanted to do something that was sort of, you know, for domestic, for small, that's affordable, that's, you know, people can carry around, and that kind of thing. It combined humor, looks at flawed characters, things that appeal to me, and looking at privilege and wealth in our society, and then, you know, working people's issues and that kind of stuff. So I kind of started looking, I don't know where the commemorative plate idea came from. I think because it was transportable and it gives you a canvas to work on. And then I realized I don't have, these aren't really commemorative plates, they're more commentary plates. Commemorative plates having a history of, you know, celebrating an event, a person, and I'm not exactly doing that, but I'm using that background. The idea for this show, I realized, because I had to do this talk, actually came from, in Saskatoon, I put an application for a show into the Craft Council, which I thought about, it must have been in 2013. No, yeah, and then I think I wanted to do a show in 2014, and it was going to be titled, You Reported What? A Response to the Media Through My Media Craft. And it was going to be responses to what was happening in the news at that time. And I got turned down, and Paula's mix came out of that. I think she put in an application at the same time. Paula actually had photos that showed, you know, when you say you're going to have a show, you should have, you know, images that are sort of going to be in the show, and I didn't have any of those because I haven't worked on it yet. But anyway, that's beside the point. So that's kind of where that happened. And some of the people that I'm looking at, when I started looking at the plates for commentary and things, are people like, you might recognize, John Chalk has some plates that he does. Jim Smith, if I had shown you, if I had my images, Jim Smith is a Nova Scotia potter, and he did this gorgeous plate, like with mosquitoes on it and cooking wieners over a fireplace, but it's so delicately done and beautifully done that unless you really step in and look, you don't realize that these are just part of his design work that he's done. Stephen Dixon, Stephen Bird are all having fun. Paul Scott have fun with these plates. And the other challenge I really wanted to explore, and it was my main challenge with these plates, was introducing text onto a clay surface. Because I had never done that. It had always really interested me. And I didn't want to just put it on, like what's happening now in ceramics is you can actually put, text through a photocopier. It's a special kind of photocopier that has a lot of red iron oxide in it, and you can actually put it right and fire it right onto your plates. And so that's why I didn't do any of that, but I can do that. This is the kind of changes that are happening with the clay world. The photos, like I got my cell phone or my iPad, I took photos of me, my daughter, I took a photo off Facebook. And then what happens is I sent that out to a woman in Nova Scotia who has she crowdsourced a photocopier that instead of has toner in it, it has ceramic oxides. So you literally put the photo through a Photoshop program, and then you run it through a photocopier, and then she sends me back the decals, which I then fire up to 800 degrees or whatever. So when people are walking on their floors, and these beautiful new tiles that we have now, they're the ones that show marble, but we know it's not marble, or there's actually wood on our tiles. Those are actually pressed. Sometimes they don't even put water in their clay anymore. They just do pressed clay, and then they photocopy. Those are photo printed, copied on our tiles now. It's a huge, massive business how we're getting those amazing new tile products that are coming into Canada. Same kind of idea with this technology. So anyway, I just think that's fascinating. The other thing I wanted to do right from the start was working with the text, but making these pieces look really stressed because of sort of what I'm commenting about in terms of what's happening right now. And so I had to figure that out because it's really hard to take the clay so that it almost cracks, but it doesn't crack. So, and it's papered clay, and I actually bisqued it straight up to a high temperature. I didn't do a low temperature bisque to try and get that, and then I have it on 3 legs so that it kind of flops around. But anyway, those are some of the things that I was dealing with, and I had to figure it all out in about a couple months. And boy, with clay, everything goes great until you stick it into an oven and burn it at 2,000 degrees. So there was some excitement there. But it was really cool to do it with all my my classmate, my studio mates in Ottawa. Everybody likes to visit and talk about what everybody else is doing. So I think that's about all I really wanted to say.
I'd just like to point out for people looking at the plates, I did the labeling, and there are detailed explanations beside many of the pieces. So if you didn't catch when Puck was talking just now, there are explanations for the pieces that might be less obvious on the actual labels for the piece.
Yeah, and then when I designed them, the text that goes with them was that, like they go together.
Yeah.
One of the pieces went to Fusion. They have a Canada 150 piece, and so I submitted what am I calling, commentary plate to them. And it's the Peter Zowski quote, "As Canadian as possible under the circumstances." Do you remember that when he held a Canada-wide exhibition of, if the Americans have as American as apple pie, what do we have? And that's what came back. And then I did some graphic stuff on there that referred to that.
Puck, it's great to see your work. I mean, you're a social activist, which I guess people know, but you know, here it is coming together now with your work, and I think that's really exciting. It must feel like you're taking the fragments of your life and your past, and you're starting to amalgamate.
Yeah,
these things.
it would be really fun if I can continue on this track. Like if a country, that's based on a lot of the work that I did with Peter Preble when I was his constituency assistant. And I worked for him because he was such a strong environmentalist and had huge concerns, and that was the main one. Like we just have to turn around what's happening in Saskatchewan and Alberta with our greenhouse gas emissions because they are really astronomically high. Yeah. So hopefully Peter will be able to see it. So.
Terrific, thank you.
Thanks so much for coming. And before I start, and I'll make it very brief because I think that I have an aptitude for surrounding myself with brilliance and talent. And so I want to acknowledge the brilliance and talent of Martin, Cathryn, and Puck. And thank you for coming all this way. That's great. Now, so I wanted to talk just briefly about the influences in my art and my aesthetic, and that would be having a Scandinavian parent and a Scottish parent, and having a minimalist environment that I was raised in. Minimalist, but of great quality. I have a wonderful art collection, and and porcelain collection of Rosenthal, and they have a Martin, and they have a James, and so that environment really influenced me, as well as the prairie scene, and that kind of stark simplicity, and the simplicity in the colors. And then I went over to Sweden and found an Iranian, married, and that confluence of Iranian and Scandinavian influence, and then our lives in the Arctic, which was another influence of Inuit art, and working at the Northern Images store, and working at the Great Northern Arts Festival in Inuvik, having that kind of exposure to that there's a purity and simplicity and an elegance to the art, and the people, of course, the culture. So, I think that all just as integrated into my being a fan of color and of design. I studied at the Banff Center. I took a year design program. And then I had dabbled in my fine arts training, and I spoke with Graham Fowler and Alison Norland, and I said, I want to finish it. I just got to finish it. And I needed a year and a half. I needed a little bit more than a year and a half. But what I did was I condensed it. I looked at all the colleges, and I applied, and I was accepted. And I thought, no, I think I'll just go to NASCAD, because that's been my dream college. So I went out there and I spent a year and a half, and I did 7 courses one semester, and 6 courses another, and another 6. And I was just 24/7. I woke up in the morning, had a curriculum that matched my rigidity. I just was inflexible. I did yoga in the morning. I had the same kind of a meal, and then I was gone for 14 hours. Took the bus, and I just kept on that schedule, and that's the only way I could get it done. But I was a long distance away from everybody, so that was hard on family and friends. But it was really the only way I could just focus in and get it done. Finished it and came back and returned to the Craft Council, which has been another influence of the craft artists, and the M International Collaboration, that is a biennial event used to be at Clay&Canvas, and then it moved over to Ness Creek. And that exposure to artists from around the world, and working in collaboration, because that tends to be more of my nature. As the communications coordinator for the Craft Council, I liked having a committee, and I liked consulting, and I liked talking, and so that's why I like exhibitions like this. I like working with people, putting our work together, finding commonalities, and sharing. That's basically my nature. So, I'm trying to think of, I went to New Zealand and I attended the collaboration there, and I ran into a Maori artist who he was just like a magnet, so I went over to him and I just said, I hear you do tattoos. So I got myself a Maori traditional tattoo symbolizing my, the 4 elements and myself as a mother and as, other different, he gave me almost a 12-minute recording of what the meaning of the tattoo after he'd interviewed me and gone through the process to really. So that was a wonderful experience, and that came out of the M International. So that's been a big part of who I am as well. And I studied under Walter Ahlstrom as well. I had a class designed for myself, and I proposed it. He accepted it, and it was all about vessels. So he gave me great marks. We had a wonderful relationship, and I think he was terrific. So I have a lot of regard for ceramic work. I just came back and realized I'm not nearly as good as I just can't. I can't be as great. The time and commitment, I have such respect for it. But between the two mediums, painting and ceramics, I defaulted to painting because I felt like that it was just more transportable. I found it easier just to navigate.
Well, physical, you were having physical problems with
the back and the wrist and the feet. I still suffer from, a bit of a swollen ankle from really walking into the base of a wheel, and I just, But, my work reflects, I think, some of that, the strata, the simplicity, the celebration of color. And Kaya Snelma Harris is a friend of mine and a weaver, and she admired Agnes Martin, who was a minimalist painter, and once again breaks everything down to just some very pure elements. So I looked for, as Marcus was referring to, a way to earn an income. So I did a master's in geography and planning. I work as a planning consultant, so this is the highway out to Outlook where I worked for a while, and I find, the highways are very similar. The landscape is similar, but I break it down, and for me, I like the calm. I tend to be that. I think the effect of having something quiet that I can look at and pause and reflect is what I target. So, and I tend to really like, as a trained graphic designer, I like patterns. So my slides are all locked up somewhere that you can't see, but I see patterns. I mean, I look at the floor and I'm looking at the lines, and when Martin was referring to the lines, and I'm attracted to those bottles because I can see them. So that must be my ADHD. I like that. So I tend to do a few paintings in a series, and then that's it. I kind of drop. I have done several animal figures, and this is the only portrait I've ever done. That's Marianne, who I did a French immersion with, and it took me 5 weeks, and she finally came back to me after I'd asked her, could I take a photograph of you, please? And finally, after the 5th week, just before closing, she said, you can take a photograph of me. So I celebrated that, but once again, I couldn't abstract it the way I normally would and play with it and interpret it, because out of respect for her rigid lifestyle and her, I had to really keep on course for more representational work. So, but so when I look at it, I just see the beautiful Mariama and her Muslim faith and her. And so aside from that, I want to thank you, Marcus, for hosting us again and for letting us, come to you and for the ease in which you make this just a wonderful process.
You make me look good, Gale, so I appreciate that.
So, and thank you once again to my artist friends, and thanks, nice to see you.
Thanks, Gale.
Are we allowed to ask you questions?
Oh,
the interrogation.
Well, I'm just, there's something about the light that's in your work, and then you mentioned being in the Arctic. And
Yes.
I was wondering if, I don't know how long you spent there, but I was wondering how being in that different light and then returning here, if there was, like, how it has affected you. And I also noticed that there's a lack of shadow, which seems dictated
Flattened
so much by light, but it seemed, I'm wondering if how the Arctic and that different type of light affected the way you paint.
Well, we did live in Churchill, Manitoba, Cree Lake, which is northern Saskatchewan, and then Inuvik. And of those three, Inuvik deprived sunlight for a 1 month period in the winter, and then 24-hour sunlight in the summer. So of course I could bake at 4 in the morning or 4 in the afternoon. Didn't matter. It was this, and I celebrated that. I have a little bit of claustrophobia. I was offered a few positions as a designer in rooms that had no light. So if I'm not near natural sunlight, and so, you know, I'll be referring to that door, but my work, well, I like the luminosity. I also worked in glass, so I like that translucency. I like the layering. I like that, you know, I enjoy, and I try to capture that. These pieces were not as much, but I normally don't do work as flat, which, you know, with the absence of that shadowing does flatten things and bring them in. And I like the idea of things moving to the distance, a perspective, so that you're carried into. So these three are different for me, and they're the most recent of my works. And now I'm thinking maybe I should put some shadows in.
There is shadows in that sort of that dimension to it. It seems like more a celebration of the light.
Yes, yeah. Well, if there's anything to, and I honestly didn't. I have put in some of my landscape pieces the shadows of the poles, but I just wanted, there's just a purity with the light coming from this direction, and you can certainly in any of the photographs, and while you're driving, the shadow is there. But yeah, I just I have that liberty and license to just remove.
Yeah, she can do that if she wants to.
I just remember the return of light.
Pardon me?
I remember living way up north too, and that return of light.
The celebration.
Yeah.
We actually had a big celebration. Now, my partner, it was really affected him, that I put in, as the preschool teacher, I put in an indoor garden. I had I went to full spectrum lighting and had, like I said, the indoor garden, so it was on all the time. And for me, I had to interpret. I had to do what I could to introduce that. Yeah, when it's not there, it's hard on people who suffer from light deprivation. No more questions. Time for everybody.
Good. No, I'm not, no,
Yeah.
it's over.